Good evening, everyone. I'm very, very excited to see so many people out in this crowd tonight. You know it's beautiful outside, right? And you're still here. So thank you. I know many of you have been attending these meetings for well over 14 months now as we've started and now come close to the completion of our new zoning ordinance for the city of Mount Pleasant. So thanks for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jacob Kane. I'm the city planner for the city of Mount Pleasant. We're here tonight to present to the community the draft character-based code. This has been a long time coming, and we're really excited to share this document with you. After tonight's meeting or during it, if you have your smartphone, if you go to mountpleasant.org/character, you can download your own copy of the draft code as well as the draft zoning map. Those documents will be on that page throughout this process. We're looking for feedback from the community. We want to know what you think about this code. We hope, and I certainly believe, that this code hits on many of the things we heard from you and members of the community during this long process of developing the code. But we want to know what you think. So we're asking for your review and comment between now and August 24th. As I said, we've been working on this project for some time. We are currently in the green spot, July 2017, presenting the code to you and the members of the public. We'll be having this public review period through August 24th, passing comments along to our consultants, Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, or as we've affectionately called them, TUPAC, so that they can work on the final version of this code that will move through the adoption process. We expect that the public hearings on our code will be held beginning at the Planning Commission in October and at the City Commission in November, which would bring the code into effect before the end of 2017. As I mentioned, many of you, I think most of you in this room, were here back in November for Planapalooza. Contrary to popular belief, the new code is not called Planapalooza. Planapalooza was just the name for that 4-day engagement period, but we were really excited at the level of participation we saw throughout that weekend, as well as at our kickoff events in September. We heard a lot of great things and a lot of great ideas from the community. I can tell you we couldn't incorporate every great idea. Not every great idea we heard was zoning related, but to the extent we could take the feedback that you all provided us and turn it into actionable code language, we sought to do that. You can see the evidence from Planapalooza if you were here or if you weren't here, all along these walls. I know our staff and policymakers were so excited about Planapalooza that they asked that these maps be hung, and fortunately they've lasted this many months as a testament to the public's interest in this project, and they're real passionate about their community. This new code also builds not just upon Planapalooza and our engagement through this process, but also on the city's 2014 master plan. And there were a number of things recommended in that master plan that we've sought to incorporate in this draft code. Those are listed up there. I'm certain you can read those yourself. And I think you'll see as we walk through the draft language of the code, as you read the document yourself over this next month, you'll find that we've successfully accomplished these goals in this draft product. For my part, I wanted to highlight 5 things that we've heard routinely from the community throughout this process and prior to this process in terms of goals that we wanted to accomplish with our new code, and I believe this new code does accomplish these goals. So the first goal is to provide more predictability about what you can build and where you can build it. And so I've heard pretty much every month when we bring a case to the Planning Commission, I get a question from someone who says, well, I didn't know someone could build that there. And when you look at our current code, there's really not a lot of certainty about what can be built where and what that's going to look like and how it's going to be used. And so this code's going to produce more predictability for the community, so you can have a little bit more certainty about what can be built and where it can be built in the community. Second thing we wanted to do was provide more opportunities for mixed-use development. So unfortunately, right now our current code has a very suburban orientation. It makes mixed-use development difficult or impossible in much of our community. This code is going to make mixed-use development a lot more easy to accomplish in a lot more areas. Third thing we tried to accomplish was to put more emphasis on walking and biking. And we see that our master plan, if you're familiar with our master plan, a significant portion of that document is devoted to the region non-motorized transportation plan. And the city's been working diligently on implementing that master plan. for non-motorized transportation, and this code is going to help to build on that transportation network and make walking and biking a lot more pleasant in our community. Fourth, certainly not least, these are not in any rank of importance, and I want to make that clear. These are probably, if anything, inverted in importance. Number 4 is preserving and reinforcing the character of downtown and residential neighborhoods. What we heard at Planapalooza, and when I've asked people, you've probably, if you're in this room, you may have been subject to me asking you, what do you like about our community as it exists today, and what don't you like? What we heard from people about what they liked is that they like our downtown. They really love our downtown. They want to see downtown continue to evolve and continue to improve, but they really like what we have there now already. And we heard the same thing about our residential neighborhoods, and some residential neighborhoods in particular. Just as an anecdote, I asked our city staff by email to tell me about the neighborhoods that they liked in our community. And I expected that I'd get some diversity of answers, and I'd probably hear certain things over and over again. But I was really shocked to find that the vast majority of people who responded said, if I could live anywhere in the community, I'd probably want to live on Fancher Street or Kinney Street, almost universally. People who live out in Remus said, if I ever moved into town, I'd buy a house on Kinney Street or Fancher Street. And it was just funny, over and over again, people said that. And so we saw that people really cared about these neighborhoods. They wanted to see them protected, and they also wanted to see more neighborhoods like those. And then finally, transforming Mission Street. Pretty much since the day I arrived here in Mount Pleasant in 2015, I've heard from folks that were concerned about Mission Street. Business owners are concerned that people can't safely get in and out of their businesses and shop. Residents don't like driving on Mission Street. They avoid it. I hear that word a lot, avoid Mission Street. People don't feel like it's attractive, that it's a good representation of our community as a whole. And the community at Planapalooza made it very clear that Mission Street was one of their primary areas of interest in terms of transformation. And so this code is going to hopefully help the city over the coming years to transform Mission Street into something the community can be proud of. With that, I'm going to turn this over to our consultants. We have with us tonight Bill Wright and Becky Timmons. Bill and Becky have been working with us over these past 14 months and really more importantly working with you to produce the document that we're going to present tonight. And so I'll turn things over to Becky.
All right. I'm going to talk a little bit to kick this off before we get into the nitty-gritty of the code. I'm going to kind of explain the difference between existing conventional coding and the character-based zoning that we're introducing here. The main differences between conventional zoning and character-based zoning are that conventional zoning is based on concepts that originated back in the 20s. They primarily regulate and separate uses. They're not concerned very much with building form and building placement and the way that a lot is laid out. Character-based zoning, on the other hand, regulates both use and form, focuses on creating and preserving walkable mixed-use places of character, like Jacob just identified as one of the primary goals. They're more graphically based for ease of understanding and use. As we go through the code, you're going to see a lot of graphics. They protect what everyone loves about the city, and they ensure that redevelopment of underutilized properties supports and strengthens what you love. So you've all told us what areas you love. We're going to try to help you protect those. So the process of transforming your conventional code to a character-based code began back in September when we came for the kickoff event, when we started doing a zoning translation, which is where we take a look at your existing code and we analyze things like setbacks and uses, and we try to figure out which of those conventional zones best match character-based zones that we've identified. So that's what you're looking at here. You're looking at a matrix of setbacks and things like that, and an initial pass at translating those zones. This is kind of a summarized version of how your conventional zoning districts, R1 and R2, would translate to what we call Character District 3L, which we'll explain in a little more detail. So that's that. The second thing we do after the zoning translation is we go out and we do synoptic surveys. Jacob talked a little bit about Fancher and Kinney Street and some of those areas that people told us that they love the most and that exemplify these character districts. So what we did, actually Jacob and I, went out and measured a ton of neighborhoods throughout the community. We looked at areas that exemplify rural residential neighborhoods and more urban areas like downtown. So this is what we've identified as CD3, a suburban neighborhood. I think a lot of these houses are on Fancher Street. So we go out and we measure things like lot width, block width, setbacks. We count the number of trees. We look at how many cars are parked on the street. And then what we do is we turn that into, these were created during the Planapalooza when we came back in November. We turn that into basically prototypes of those different districts. So this is kind of the Mount Pleasant CD3. We take a look at the character of your neighborhoods, and we look at the architecture, and we create a rendering that exemplifies those districts. So what we found when we were taking a look at your residential areas is that there were actually 2 CD3 districts, and Bill will get into that a little bit more. So we've got the one we talked about first, CD3 suburban, which is Fancher Street, areas like that that are a little more closer to downtown, smaller lots, smaller setbacks. And then you've got other areas like, I believe it's the Swan District, where you've got some bigger houses, bigger lots, deeper setbacks. Then you've got what we call a general urban area, which is not quite downtown and not quite residential. It's somewhere in the middle. So we measured those areas, and then we come up with a prototypical illustration. Same thing for downtown. We went out and measured setbacks, lot widths, building heights, and then we come up with a prototypical downtown. So the next step is creating the zoning map. And basically what happens is the character-based districts are going to replace your existing zoning designations. So what we do is we take a look at the zoning translation that we did first. We do that translation, and then we start to look at areas that maybe you want to be transformed. Maybe you don't want to keep the same character. So we'll do some alteration of districts. We'll change some of the boundaries of districts, and we'll also create some, what Bill will get into more detail about, some special, I'm going to draw a blank, special requirements and special districts. Special requirements are for areas where, for whatever reason, you've decided that the uses that would typically be allowed in that district, you would like to be more limited. For example, student housing, there are certain areas where we've designated that student housing is appropriate, even though otherwise it would be allowed throughout the CD4 district. So you'll see that in a little more detail if you go on the website, and you can zoom into that map and see where those special requirements are. That's a little bit of a zoom in, but again, it's kind of hard to see on that screen. All right, and from there, we start creating the code.
So what I thought, if I had started out the presentation, I'd have said, we present the code, here's the presentation, this is it, and then y'all can just go read it. But we won't do that to you. There will be people who want to mire down into the details of it. There'll be other people who would rather keep it at a higher level. When I get on an airplane every day, every time, I always think, I want to get there safely, and I can't tell the pilot how to fly that plane because I don't know how, and so I just kind of trust it to the expert. And so to some extent, I know y'all are sort of in a mode of kind of trusting the experts, and I hope you do it as well as you do when you get on the plane, if you're not afraid of flying. This part of the presentation will be way drier than what Becky just did, because, it is a code after all, and I am a lawyer after all. And so it's like, I always try to make these exciting, but it's really hard.
Well, and there's something exciting at the end, so wait for it.
And I did want to say, and I told Michelle she needs to, don't fall asleep during this part, because at the end is the better part. So what we really did with the code was we knew that there were certain things in the master plan and certain goals that that the city was asking to be satisfied by the new zoning, and we realized that the conventional zoning is not really the way to do that. Becky told you about the difference between conventional zoning and character-based zoning, and she told you about the synoptic surveys. And in all that really fine data that was on the synoptic surveys is literally measurement after measurement after measurement. And those measurements in the aggregate create the character of a place. And so we know that if we inject those measurements into a character-based code, you'll end up with a place of that character. And so that's the whole theory of form-based coding. We took your existing zoning code, we kept all of the zoning code to the extent that it was not in conflict with the new character-based approach. They're always, a conventional code written based on stuff that was done in the 20s always has some interface that has to be worked out with a character-based code. And we did all that. And so a lot of what you see in the code, if you know your existing code, will look very, very familiar to you. And then there are certain parts of it that won't be stuff you've seen before. At any rate, outline of the code. The first article, the general article, is a bunch of housekeeping stuff. It largely is brought over from your existing code. Things like, under what authority the code's adopted and what the effective date is. And we've added a section that talks about the different plan types, just as an orientation to the code, the different plan types that are submissions that would be done under the code. Talks about applications. Y'all have two things, a special use and a special regulated use, that are really similar, and we started to put those back together as one, but we ended up keeping them like they were. We tried to simplify some of the pretty tedious procedural parts of those two parts of your code. Variances and waivers. We talked in the first article just generally about how appeals are taken, and then the non-conforming lots and uses and buildings, and it's a question a lot of people ask. So does everybody have to go change their house to make it comply with this new code? And the answer is no. It's you're grandfathered, and until you do a substantial modification, you just stay like you are. If you want to do a substantial modification, the idea is that you start moving closer to the new standards than the old standards. Second article is just about the zoning map. Becky hit that a little bit already. It talks about the amendment and adoption of the zoning map. The things that are owned, right this minute your zoning map has your zoning districts. The new map is going to have character districts, special districts, civic zones. Oddly, you don't have civic zones on your map right now. So that all of your green spaces are actually just within the other zones. And to my thought, probably not protected in the way that you would really want to protect a green space. And so we have designated civic zones, and when something's zoned civic zone, you can have civic space there, you can have a civic building there, and if you want to change the zoning on it, then it takes the city commission has to approve it. And then special requirements, and Becky told you about that, where if you're in a particular district, and I don't think there are any in the code that are done like this, but let's just say that you thought maybe the heights at one part of Mission Street ought to be a little bit different from the heights at the other part of Mission Street. You might have a special requirement on that part so that you could say, well, this needs to be 4 stories instead of 5 stories, whatever. That's just an example of a special requirement. The third article just talks about the several character districts specifically. Becky told you a little bit about those, but the CD3 is, we call it suburban, meaning less than urban. It's not so urbanized, but that's essentially your single-family residential on a medium-sized lot. Y'all have another district here that is also single-family residential, and it's on larger lots. And you called it what, the Swan District? Is that, and so that's an example of the CD3L. We just L for large lot. The general urban area is really a transitional, kind of interesting, kind of mixed up kind of place, more eclectic than just single family residential is, where you start going from single family residential toward the more urban like you are downtown. And that's CD4. And then CD5 is essentially your downtown here, and then the other area that's developed at that higher intensity would be like on the Mission Street corridor. They don't look anything alike, but as far as the uses and the intensity of development, they are similar in that way. Special districts. Y'all have some special districts already. I think you have an industrial. I'm going to do this from memory. I think you have a research center one. I think there may be a university one. You have an ag district, which there are just a couple of odd little spots that it appears on your zoning map, and so we've turned those into a special district ag. And then I think you don't have a hospital. Is that right, Jacob? There's not a hospital district, but you have a hospital in the neighborhood. And so we are establishing the SDH for that particular site because it has if you've been there, it's a great hospital that's when Jacob showed it to us and I saw the scale of it and the way it worked, it really works there, and unlike a lot of hospitals would. But at the same time, it has a very different character from the residences around it. And so we call that out as a separate district. And then the civic zones. And every one of these districts has different standards because, again, we're trying to create different characters by the standards that are applied to them. Next article's probably, in my mind, the most important article that's in the code, and that's it covers buildings and lots, and that's so it has all the standards at the building and lot scale as opposed to a bigger scale. We'll do that in a second. And for you, basically, if you have a project, you will submit a building and lot plan. And it'll show where your proposed building's going to be. It'll show where your driveway's going to be. It'll show the setbacks. It does a number of things. And the whole idea is you submit a plan that shows that you've complied with the building and lot standards. Like I said, it'll be one required for every project. Before you can get a building permit, you'll have to submit a building and lot plan. I think you probably submit like a little plat map, a plot plan right now. And so it serves that function, but there are some other things, other standards that you would show that you were complying with. You'd show, what the height of your building is going to be, and all of those things relative to the building and the lot. Lot coverage, like how much of the lot are you covering with building. The standards at the building and lot scale, you'll see them down the left side here. I just talked about lot occupation, how wide the lot is and how much of the surface can be covered by the building. The uses of the lot, that's similar to what you're doing now. If in the conversions, if you had uses in a C1 district, whatever district that translates to, what does it translate to, Becky? C1 translates to CD5? No, 4? Okay. So you would have those same uses would be applicable there. So the idea is to bring the uses forward. Building placement, that's your setbacks and how it, whether or not the building has like a side yard or a front yard, or does it have like some buildings have no yard, like if they were townhouses that were built adjacent to each other. And a really important one, building type, and we're going to hit it again in just a second more specifically, so I'll just say it now and pass. The most important standard that's in the code is private frontage. And private frontage is the way that a building and its lot address the public realm or the public right-of-way. So just the point of interface between where the public is and where the private is, that's your private frontage. And I'll speak more specifically to private frontage types in a second. Building standards, height, there's some facade standards, roof standards being the pitch, whether it's pitched, and if so, how it's pitched. encroachments, what things can go into a right-of-way, or things can go into a setback. Like, can a sign that's hanging over the sidewalk hang over the public sidewalk, that kind of thing. Vehicular parking, where the parking goes, bicycle parking. I guess bicycle parking is something that we have added, and going again to the kind of non-automobile types of transportation, trying to focus on that. Where your loading space is, and where the trash receptacles go, and where drive-throughs go, and all of that stuff. All of that impacts what happens when the way the character of a place presents itself to somebody as they go by, is where all of those items go on the lot. Landscape and fencing, these are all things that you have in your current code. They've been adjusted to sort of improve the character of areas, screening, lighting, and then streetscape. Oh, on the left, right-hand side here, the other left, this diagram is a building plan, and it's what somebody would submit if they were going to have multiple lots in a CD5, basically, that they were submitting on all at one time. It shows where the parking is. It shows where the buildings are. The part you can't read that's in little tiny letters is just demonstration of the how it meets the lot coverage requirements and the lot width requirements, and you'd have all of those things in a building lot plan. So the code, is, like Jacob said, is more graphically based than your current code. It's pretty highly illustrated, and standards for each district are presented in tabular form, so that if you're going to do a project in CD4, you pop open the part of the code that's CD4 standards, and you literally can just go straight down and see what's required of you. It's so easy, instead of getting all mired down in, this thing's got text in it too, but rather than getting mired down and trying to find every little detail that's in text, it gives you a way, anything that can be put in tabular form or in graphic form is put in graphic or tabular form. On the left, you've seen the renderings of the prototypical CD4, and then there are photographic examples of it. And then as you go down through the pages of it, you can't see all this, but it's like it's calling out the private frontage types that are allowed there, and what kind of civic spaces are appropriate there, the lot widths. This is all up there in the top right is like setbacks and all of that sort of thing. And again, every effort is made to make it easily understandable and easily administratable as well. Again, we're just flipping through what we call the multi-page table of the CD4 district. And this is an example of the special districts. Did you talk about special districts as far as like what they are or not? I can't remember. Okay, so a special district is an area that, because it's too big or because of its just nature, it can't meet any character district standards. So things like, if you take industrial, typically industrial has much bigger building footprints and that sort of thing. And so we make a special district for it. There are still some standards that apply to it, but largely you don't have a lot of standards applied to a special district. It's more like use-based, but it does have, where the parking might go. It has where you have to put the loading docks and that kind of thing. So much more lightly regulated than a character district, because you're not as worried about its character. And then the civic zone, again, this is really important to you guys, I think, because you need to have something that starts saying kind of what your green spaces are about and where they are, and kind of make it an important priority of the code. Building types, told you I'd loop back to them in a second. The code actually has a number of building types that it calls out for each of the districts. And so this is just an example. This isn't all of them. An example of house. It's, that's just what you think of as a single-family house, and it tells you what districts that's allowed in. So it's allowed in a little tiny note up in the top right. It actually says it's allowed in CD3, CD3L, and in CD4. And so those are the places you'd expect to see something that is in the nature of a single-family residential house. Mixed use, again, just by way of example, you see it would go into CD4, which is that kind of mixed-up transition area, or it would go into CD5, the highest intensity area, live, work. And then the private frontage, again, just drilling down a little bit on that. So there are private frontage types. These examples are, again, they're not all of them, they're just some of them. All of them are in here and are online, and you'll see that. The common yard, which is kind of what you're used to seeing, lawn in front of in a moderate-sized lot, and those common yards are appropriate in CD3, CD3L, and CD4. You wouldn't see that in a downtown setting. Because the building is set, it has to be set back to have a lawn, and your setbacks in downtown areas are typically up closer to the street. The porch, you guys, I think somebody may have made fun of us during the Planapalooza for like putting a porch on there, but I'm sure y'all would like porches if you had more of them. Like, if you don't have them where we are, we cook. We like roast without porches. But I mean, we've done projects up in the Northeast, and they all come back and say, there are no porches here. We don't know what you're talking about. Why do you need a porch? It's like really cold up here, and at any rate, so there is a frontage type of porch, and I highly recommend it to you. Shop fronts, that's your typical retail frontage. It'd be appropriate in CD4 and CD5. A stoop, that's kind of like what you have if you don't have a porch on a house. It's where you just step up. And then we have spent some time trying to simplify your sign standards. And again, like all of the other standards that we have, we've tried to make them much more illustrative and readily accessible to you. By putting all the standards for each type of sign right there on a sheet. Here's what a band sign looks like, and here are the standards for it. Again, there are way more than these two signs in there, but each sign type has a page. All right, so I said that everybody has to submit a building lot plan before you can get a building permit. There's another concept, and it's really talking about kind of more complex, bigger projects. And we refer to those as development parcel plans or development parcels. I'm missing a page here, Becky. And it's my super easy, what is one? I'll try to just tell you. It's like one of the hard concepts. I don't either. So a development parcel is a site that is 4 acres or larger, so it's a big parcel, or one that is going to require a street, a new street, or a change to a street, or one that you're asking for a rezoning of. And the reason we have this development parcel idea is that it requires you to think about a few more elements than just the building and lot standards to make sure that these larger developments perform better. So there are thoroughfare standards that are provided. So if you are going to do a street, here are the thoroughfare standards for it. And again, very illustrative and very tabular. Certain street types are appropriate in certain contexts. And so this tells you, like, where does a neighborhood street go? And the permitted districts, again, always up the top right-hand little strip there. How wide the lanes are, whether it's got a curb or a gutter, how wide the sidewalks are, whether it's got street trees or not, those sorts of things are what are talked about. And we talked about private frontage a minute ago and how it relates to the street. Well, the public frontage is just what's right on the other side of the private frontage. It's the public part, and the frontage is where those two interface. Told you we had bikeway standards that were included, just different types of bikeways. Block perimeter, it's an important thing, and at this scale particularly, because when blocks start getting too big, the area starts being unwalkable. When buildings get too big, it becomes unwalkable, and when a block gets too big, because there's only a certain amount of walking somebody's going to do to get from one place to another. And then civic zones. Civic zones are laid out by civic space types, and certain civic space types are appropriate in certain character districts. So like a square, which is shown up there, the left side with the trees around it, a square is appropriate in CD4 and CD5. Whereas a plaza is something that is probably you're more likely to see one of those only in a CD4, and you wouldn't see one in a CD5. Another concept when you get into a larger parcel is just the density of the area, and so that's regulated. If you have a development parcel, the density is prescribed at a certain number of units per acre, in a very similar way to the way your present zoning code works. And then the character district allocation is just sort of like if somebody were developing, this doesn't happen, I said before, this is a rare thing when you have a development parcel. But if somebody decided, oh, there's a big undeveloped area and I'm going to develop multiple blocks, it could happen. We always have people think, oh, that'll never happen here, and then like as soon as they turn around, there's all of a sudden all of a sudden there's this block that's like in play. So character district allocation basically tells you what is the appropriate range percentages of each of the character districts. So, 10 to 30% of single-family residential, 30 to 60 of the mixed general urban, and 10 to 30 of the CD5. And that basically keeps somebody from, or it helps them develop in a way that is not just miles and miles and miles and miles of just one type. Because essentially, to be a walkable place, you can't develop 1,000 acres of single-family residential and have no other use and have that place be walkable. It just doesn't work. And so it'd be like, this would encourage you to have your single-family residential, and within each, what we call a pedestrian shed or a walkable area, you have some focus point like a civic space, or you have a little neighborhood corner that might have a little corner store. It might have a mixed use situation there where you have retail and maybe multifamily right above it. And so that's the idea of character district allocations. And boy, you think this has been boring so far. Now we're in the article that, like, even as a lawyer, I find it to be a little bit difficult to sit in my seat and write. Most of this, though, is still coming from your existing code. It just goes through applications and talks some more about variances and waivers and what permits there are and certificates of occupancy and appeals and notices you have to give and hearings and that kind of stuff. It does have another pretty important part in it, which is site plan review. And that's just being brought forward from the existing situation, remedies and penalties. And then there are some definitions. Again, we use, I don't know, 90% of the existing definitions. There's some concepts in character-based coding that are a little unique and not, you wouldn't have a definition for like a pedestrian shed. There's no such thing as a pedestrian shed in conventional zoning, and so that's what this section is about. Whenever we have a chance in the definitions, we try to provide illustrations for two reasons: to keep it from being quite as tedious and give you something to look at that's a picture, but also to explain a concept a little bit. And so thus is the presentation of the code. And I'm going to turn it back over to Becky for a sec.
We're just going to do a little summary and show you what the code accomplishes. A lot of these you're going to recognize from the goals that Jacob introduced at the beginning. The code encourages mixed-use character-based development. It provides standards for improved pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It encourages high-quality, transformative redevelopment on Mission Street. It establishes a civic zone to protect parks and open spaces, like Bill talked about. It makes quality development predictable. It provides standards for context-sensitive infill and redevelopment, and it protects the character of residential neighborhoods and designates appropriate areas for student housing. Something else that the code does, and this is the fun part that we told you to stay all awake for, so everybody's eyes open. This is the fun stuff, but I need to preface this a little. We want to inspire you. We want to show you what this code is capable of creating in Mount Pleasant. But in order to do that, in order to inspire you, we have to take some liberties. So you're going to see some plans that maybe remove some buildings or change some things around, but we just want to show you something kind of cool. So this is Lot 5 and Lot 4 downtown. I believe it's Washington Street on the left-hand side of that parking lot and Michigan on top. Is that correct? And the city asked us to take a look at this property and see how it could be redeveloped. It's an interesting block. It's fairly shallow, and it's already got some parking, and we didn't want to lose all of that parking. So really, we were kind of limited by the constraints of the site, but we still wanted to show how you would redevelop this according to the code. And one very important thing that the code would no longer allow, if you did redevelop this, is parking as a frontage type. Bill talked about the frontage types. You can no longer have a parking lot that's interacting with the street. You have to have some sort of a building shielding that parking. So here's an idea we came up with. If you look at the previous plan, you see that the row of parking on the left-hand side is really the only thing, and on the top are the only things that are being eliminated, but we're kind of limited in the depth of the buildings that we can get in there. So we've put in some liner buildings to hide that parking, create some mixed-use opportunities. We've left the existing buildings. We've added in some plazas. If you could see on the upper right-hand corner, that could possibly be a restaurant with some outdoor dining, a little courtyard in the back. Like I said, we took some liberties. We understand that there is an existing service station at the south end of that property. We thought maybe someday in the future they might want to redevelop that property. It could be a neat restaurant or something, again, with some sort of an outdoor plaza. So that's what it looks like in plan. And this is what it would look like in actuality. We're looking at it from the existing side, from the theater side of it, and seeing that we've left all of the interior parking. We've created some connections, so we understand that downtown parking is very important. So if you were to drive in that lot and not be able to find a parking spot, we've aligned the alley entrance with the alley across the street, so you could zip over there, see if there's any parking on the other side. We've made sure that there's parking on street all around it, so that's kind of fun. The second property we were asked to take a look at is the town center, which is right next door to us. Again, parking as a main use along the street would no longer be allowed, so we've looked at creating some opportunities for some mixed-use development and creating something that we heard a lot about during the Planapalooza is the need for a larger civic space downtown, a place to have festivals and live music events and things like that. So this is what we came up with. You'll notice pretty obviously the housing building has been removed, and we've put in a structured parking. But we've also created the opportunity for some mixed income housing on the backside, facing over the park, looking towards across the river into the park. The buildings on the front side facing the new town green could also have housing incorporated in that. So you haven't lost the housing that would be there. You've just spread it out. You've created opportunities for different types of housing. You also see we've added a building on the far side of the roundabout just to kind of enclose that corner and make it a little bit more urban. And then that's what this could look like. So, kind of neat, huh? All right.
We worked, go back, one of the things that I was particularly disappointed in is when we drove through the intersection a second ago. When we drove through the intersection, we came into town, the compass in the middle of the street was gone. And you just don't know what troubles the rendering artist went to make this be your place that you recognize. And then Jacob tells me, like, after a couple of snow plows, like, the image is gone anyway. In my mind, it was like this thing that is like, it is Mount Pleasant. At any rate, I'm not a planner. I told Jacob, though, what I would recommend, and also not the city manager with the money, because this might cost something, but what I would recommend would be to put your compass back and to put it down in colored pavers so that it doesn't disappear when the snowplow comes. That was just my lighthearted plan.
So, just to conclude, as a reminder, the draft of the code is online. It's going to be up until the 24th. Please send your comments to the city so that we can finalize this draft by the end of the year. Questions? Comments?
Everybody still awake?
Let's go back to the fun one.
I don't know if you could talk a little bit more about mission and like how that could change.
About mission? Well, mission can change in similar ways that we've shown here, again, because parking would not be allowed up on Mission anymore. Any new development would need to be built up against the street. I'm trying to think, we showed some really cool redevelopment opportunities back when we did the Planapalooza. We should have brought those to show again. But the same sorts of things that you're seeing in these renderings could occur on Mission as well. They have the same set of standards as the downtown, so the same character would occur down there. Yes?
I've had, some people express concerns, like, about approaches to signage, like, for example, reducing signage by, private businesses and how sometimes the city can be restricted. What kind of approaches will they take towards signage for private business, private businesses?
Signage
Bill.
for private businesses.
Mike?
I think of myself as speaking loudly. So the sign or part of your ordinance has been substantially revised, and the idea in all of those revisions is to make the sign types that are allowed to be more context based. So signs that are, like a huge sign that's meant to be seen for 5,000 feet is not something that you would put into a walkable area, for instance. If you look through the sign part of the ordinance, if you can go online and look through the sign part of the ordinance, you'll see each of the sign types that are permitted in the sizes and that sort of thing. So the sign code is much improved, and we had the really, really good input from the city attorney on sign revisions that really needed to be made. And they're revisions that need to be made in every city across the country that people haven't really gotten into their codes yet. There's a Supreme Court decision in 2015 that really impacted what types of sign ordinances that cities can have. And yours has, with this process, has been brought up to that standard. So.
I'm wondering, does the new ordinance and code allow for new and different types of housing? For example, well, you know, that it's not quite single family and it's not quite multifamily, like co-housing, where I live in a small university town, in a planned unit development that had 17 single-family homes in the space of 4 standard American lots. They're very small footprint houses with single-car garages. Anyway, is that kind of thing allowed?
That concept is not specifically allowed, but you'll find that in the throughout the code, the lot sizes tend to be more moderate than the type of, when you said a standard lot, the lots are probably smaller than what you're thinking of as a standard lot. There's room on them for a house, and there's room on them for an accessory building, there's room on them for a yard. There's not room on them for another building, another house. And you know, throughout the code, it says that there's one principal building allowed on each lot. A lot has a principal building associated with it, and so that the idea of co-housing wouldn't really work. Now, we do have townhouses. Mm-hmm. We have townhouses that are in the code, which are essentially single-family houses that are attached to each other laterally, so that notion is in there.
I'm checking right, ooh, that's very loud. I'm checking right now the minimum lot width in our residential district, so I can tell you what that is. It is 50 feet minimum in CD3, but in CD4, I think it's only 18 feet. So that's not to say that you couldn't have a bunch of small lots, each with their own principal building clustered together. That's something that would now be allowed.
So would a developer be able to come in and build tiny unit development where a bunch of, several lots are lumped together and it's built at a higher density than would be allowed with a single family?
Not under the code as it's written, no. The planned unit developments, just historically, were kind of an experiment to try to get better development and unique development in places where only conventional zoning was otherwise allowed. But it's largely been used as a way to keep from complying with zoning ordinances. A lot of cities, the ones that still have PUDs, awful lot of cities have gotten rid of PUDs. The ones that still have them, nobody submits under a regular zoning ordinance. They all go PUD because they're all trying to dodge whatever requirements are in there. And so they've been abused very badly in most situations.
What have you, how have you looked at parking when, minimum parking? What kind of, effort have you took to look into minimum parking and examine whether current standards meet future needs and actually reflect uses?
Well, we know, one of the things we knew going into this was that our current parking standards were very much out of date. And so that was something we wanted to address in this draft code. At the present time, the draft code does not include any parking minimums. And so parking would be provided, minimum parking would be really market driven. So if a development project came forward and felt that they needed 50 parking spaces for a grocery store, then they'd be able to provide 50 parking spaces, but there wouldn't be a code prescribed minimum for that use. Correct.
Yes, what are the height restrictions for buildings on Mission Street?
5 stories.
5 stories? Okay, thank you.
Depends on which district it would be in. So there's two
Well,
different.
yeah.
The
Mission and
entire-
Broomfield.
We should probably talk about that specific property offline, but yeah, that, if it's the location, the corner I'm thinking you're speaking about, it would be 5 stories.
I guess you were going to say some of it falls in CD4 and some of it falls in CD5.
Correct.
And so there are two different standards depending on whether it falls in the CD4 part or the CD5 part.
You know, I'm sorry. I believe that this stuff is very necessary in the development, you know, of and growth of a city. My question would be, was it drafted in a spirit of encouraging growth and development? Obviously.
Well, I can say, I know the images that were developed were designed to meet the code that's being presented. I think that one of the challenges we have with our current code is that when you apply it to our existing fabric of our community, in many cases, properties don't conform because there's too much building on the lot versus what our current code allows. There may be not enough parking versus what current code allows. Setbacks are often not met by some of the older development in our community. And what this code does is by relaxing those standards, by allowing lesser setbacks, by allowing less parking, you can actually get more building on a lot. And in terms of growth, if you're looking at it from a tax base standpoint, if you're looking at it from a population standpoint, we derive tax base and population from buildings, not from open spaces or parking lots, things of that nature. And so this code should have a positive effect of allowing, encouraging, and making infill development, which is really most of what we see in our community, able to do more with the amount of land that we have.
Does this code do anything to address the issue of buildings that stand empty and unoccupied for a long period of time?
No, and there's not really a good way to address that through zoning. Well, anyway, what this code will do, I mean, that could help, although I think it'd be in narrow situations where it might help, is that we've obviously, it wasn't highlighted here because it's really not the emphasis of the code update, but we've taken our uses that are allowed in the city and evaluated those and looked at, we know there are gaps in our use table currently where there are things that we don't allow anywhere. And there's some complication to the way we regulate uses currently. So we've tried to streamline that. So there may be cases where a building's vacant because there's not a use that's appropriate for that building that's allowed. And it might be possible that this new code would allow that use, something that might foster use of that building in a way that you can't do today. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned considering new bike paths and new approaches. What are some to cross-street biking or what are some of the specifics that are under consideration?
The code's not gonna, the draft code doesn't mandate where you might see, like specific to our current street network, where you would see that type of infrastructure. What it would do is if you had a larger development site where streets were gonna be built, this code would be used to determine what type of bike infrastructure you might include on those new streets in a new development. So if you had 50-acre property where you're going to input a street network, you'd look at what kind of streets you were using, what kind of bike infrastructure might be appropriate to those streets, and then you'd design from there. Yes, sir?
I'm interested if the code accommodates incremental development of individual properties. Now, when we saw that picture of the new town center, it looks beautiful in the picture, and development doesn't happen, doesn't fall out of the sky that way. In fact, our downtown, as beautiful as it is, didn't fall out of the sky that way. So incremental development on individual lots is what I'm interested in hearing how the code accommodates that, so that if I have an empty lot and I want to invest incrementally, I mean, this is local investment, so it's not like I'm going to go out there and get $20 million and build a 7-story building. It's more likely that I'm going to do things one step at a time. Does the code accommodate that in any way?
Yes, you would do your building and lot plan that I talked about, and submit it showing that you had satisfied the standards of that character zone that your lot's in. And if you do, you can then get your building permit. That's essentially the way it works. It works actually like that much more on a lot-by-lot basis than other ways. I mean, that's just incrementally is how new stuff typically happens in most places. Now, there occasionally will be cities where a big developer sees a huge opportunity and they'll go and mow down a huge area and do it all, but it's so rare. It is so rare. Typically, it's building by building by building. Go ahead. I see you.
Just real quick, this is more personal for me, but I live in the proposed hospital district. I guess what difference does that make to me?
I don't think you live in it because it's actually just the hospital property.
Yeah.
Yes.
The hospital is the only hospital district in the town.
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah, that special district would apply directly to the property that's owned by McLaren, Central Michigan, only that property. The majority of that neighborhood surrounding it would be in the CD3 zone, which is that single-family residential zone, which is very comparable to the current zoning, which is generally R3 in that area. If there aren't any other questions, I wanted to remind everyone there hopefully are still some slips. I will say I grossly underestimated our turnout tonight. So there were some slips in the back that had the web address where you could download the draft code on the city's website. We'll also have 2 copies available for folks to look at City Hall and at Veterans Memorial Library. So if you would prefer, if you're more of a hard copy person, if you'd prefer to take a look at a hard copy, we'll have those 4 copies available during this period. Any questions you might have after tonight, please let me know. Jacob Kane, City Planner, 2nd floor. Don't hesitate to call, email, drop in, preferably by appointment, but drop in. Just so I'm here, as I want to be here if you come in, and we can talk about what your questions or concerns might be. If you have questions about specific properties that you want to address, if you have questions about specific language, please let me know. We know this is a big project. We're redoing our entire zoning ordinance, and I've read the draft, and it's complicated for me too, and I'm the city planner, so please reach out if you have those questions and comments. We really appreciate your feedback to this point. We really look forward to your feedback over the next month, and just thank you again for spending a really beautiful evening here learning about our new zoning code.